Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of SuperCoach Mates. While 2025 is just upon us, we are only 14 days away from opening round. What we're going to do over the next few episodes is we're just going to go through the sort of the higher priced and mid-price perhaps picks for each of the four positions. And then I'm going to introduce Thomas to a segment in one of the later episodes, which I'm sure will ruffle some feathers. So as per normal, I am joined by Thomas. How are you? How is your Christmas/summer break?
Not too bad. I had a quiet one. Didn't go interstate or overseas, but yeah, just stayed in Melbourne, which was nice. But yeah, good to have the footy finally come alive again. Obviously, we're in the first stage of pre-season games at the moment, so not too much information around the corner. I know your Collingwood Mobs playing tonight in that weird Brisbane Gold Coast trifecta kind of.
Yes, the
25
Gold Coast
minutes.
have been ripped off on.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely looking forward to the footy season coming thick and fast. So yeah, as Nathan said, what we'll be doing tonight is rattling off some premiums and defenders that we think are going to be in a lot of people's sides and have a discussion about that. Rookies will leave closer to basically our final team reveal just because they're pretty volatile at the moment, and we probably won't get a good gauge at least until the second set of preseason games when, round one teams are pretty much locked away. So we're kicking off with defenders. We've got a fair few to get through. Then we'll move into midfielders, forwards, and rocks across basically the next four episodes. But yeah, kicking things off with defenders. Just putting that up on screen now. So yeah, starting off with the premiums, there's obviously a plethora to choose from, and I've picked basically 6 that are pretty popular, and we can obviously discuss some 500k plus premiums that are not as popular at the moment. But just straight off the bat, the 2 most expensive defenders at the current stage of the game, obviously when SuperCoach has just opened, Sam Flanders and Harry Sheezel. What are your thoughts immediately on those two? Like, obviously, when you pick SuperCoach, you automatically just click the most expensive players and try and stick them in your side. But are these 2 players the most obvious kind of selections, or do you reckon that we look elsewhere with more value, as a lot of defenders last year presented, 100 plus averages pretty easily?
Yeah, so I will put a disclaimer on this that I believe at the time of recording that Sam Flanders is currently in the rehab group with a back issue, I believe. So that's probably a little bit concerning for me in terms of sort of whether or not I'd start with Sam Flanders. However, I would have no problem starting with Harry Sheezel. In fact, in my classic side, he's actually my first defender now. Just a disclaimer out there. I don't know how much better he can realistically get. But I feel like with the arrival of Caleb Daniel at North Melbourne, I feel like his role off that halfback flank is done. And I feel like he's going to be sort of like a Nick Dacos clone where he basically plays as a midfielder only, perhaps even pushing into the forward line where he can do a lot more damage. So, I mean, if Flanders is named for round 1, I probably wouldn't have any problems picking him. Just because I feel like he's probably going to be in the same position with the arrival of Rioli and Noble as well at Gold Coast, that I can't see him not playing midfield. So realistically, I think both are good options, but I think just purely because, of the fact that Flanders is in the rehab group, I think if you're sort of tossing up between the 2, I think I'd be slightly leaning towards Sheezel. Yeah. But I still think both of them are viable options and probably, top 10 defenders at worst for the year. So I don't think you can go wrong with either option. But yeah, I think Sheezel's the one that I would go for out of these 2 options. Are you the same, Thomas?
Yeah, no, I do agree with you. I mean, that was the first I heard of Sam Flanders rehab in the rehab group. So probably shows how much I've been paying attention the last couple of weeks. But I think the biggest issue with Flanders at the moment is not necessarily his scoring capability. We'll just look at his scores from last year. His lowest was 91, so he was pretty much banking hundreds for fun. And as a defender, you take that and you have the week. But I guess the downside is, as Nathan pointed out, is even though he played a midfield role last year at vast points of the season and scored accordingly, there is a concern that Rioli is. I know he's been part of the rehab group with an injury, and Noble coming in. I think those two in particular are going to really impact his ability to play off the back flank. As a distributor, like Rioli was the main one for Richmond, and I could see Dimmer Hardwick, having coached at Richmond, obviously with Rioli in the side, be pretty confident in Rioli having the main ball in his hand in the half back line. So, yeah, I don't know how that'll impact Flanders. It'd be good to see Flanders, in pre-season playing off that half back line, seeing how it gels, but whether he plays because of injury or not is yet to be seen. So, yeah, I think Sheasel, on the other hand, probably is a bit safer in the fact that it just every time, we doubt him in the fact that, he might play in the midfield, he might play half forward. He seems to just be an accumulator wherever he goes. And that's maybe not to be said with his Colby McKerch, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, Sheasel, I think he's at the time of recording, he's 56% owned, and I can just see that going higher as the season goes on. I think the risk with not picking him is you're missing out on massive scores. And I think, I had a mate of mine off air who plays SuperCoach. I don't think he started Harry Sheasel last year and got burnt pretty quickly in the opening round. So I think he's just safe as houses. You just don't want to risk not having him. And there's players that you can kind of risk going against the majority, but I think in this case you just want to pick Sheasel. And I think we're both in agreement here that potentially Sheasel's the way to go, especially not confidently seeing where Flanders will play is the biggest query. And as I said, with Rioli and Noble in the side as well, that could really impact Flanders' kind of output, whereas Sheasel, we kind of know what we're expecting week in, week out. And even Sheasel's floor is pretty high as well, like that 73. I believe that was pretty much a tagged game. So he's capable of scoring 160s as well. But yeah, I'd say we're both pretty happy on having Sheasel as a B1.
Just to add to that, so big shout out here to the season record guide. If you haven't got yours, get your copy now. It's got a lot of great information in here. But they're actually comparing Sheasel to Scott Pendlebury, just with his ball use. So if you're getting compared to Scott Pendlebury, that's probably a pretty good shout out for mine. So yeah, I think Sheasel is probably the one here. I know Flanders can rack it up, but yeah, I think Sheasel just purely for what you're getting.
Yeah. Well, we'll move on to basically your D2 and D3. I've seen a lot of teams have 3 in defence, premiums 2 in defence, and going for value. But I guess you want to be picking players that are capable of scoring quite nicely. And these two definitely step in mind, and we can talk about a few others as well. Jack Sinclair and Dan Houston are ones that just under that kind of top echelon of price, that they're priced pretty close to 600k, but just one tier down from the 600 pluses. So yeah, Sinclair, as an avid Saints fan, obviously watched him quite closely, averaged close to 110 last season, played small parts in the midfield, and it seemed like whenever he was at halfback, that was his home, and that's where he scored the best, as much as we sometimes needed him in the midfield, but I'll touch on that kind of split later. And the other one is Dan Houston, Nathan's favourite love child, probably by round 3 or 4 if he steps up for you guys. But what are your thoughts on either of them? Obviously, Houston, there's a risk there that we don't know exactly where he'll play. Obviously, it seems like he's playing the backline for you guys at the moment in the Pracky game. But are there any risks with Houston, or do you think that we want the safety of maybe a Sinclair where we know from the past 2 to 3 seasons where exactly he's going to play?
Yeah, I think for this one, I think purely for that, as painful as it does say for me to do this, I think I would be picking Sinclair out of the two. Just purely because you know what you're getting with Sinclair. I think his role at St Kilda is pretty settled. The only, I guess, query on Sinclair is I think he did do his hamstring, or he sort of hurt his hamstring at the club's intra-club match simulation. So that might be a bit of something to keep your eye on. But yeah, I guess with Houston, I feel like he probably is going to sort of play more of a halfback sort of role. But he might end up being the classic like seventh midfielder, who sort of starts on the halfback line at the centre bounce, and then it sort of plays like a sweeping midfielder, if you will. So he sort of, stops the players from being able to just run straight out of the centre square and basically get that free kick inside 50. That could be his role. But I guess the one thing as well is he's probably going to take most of Collingwood's kickouts with that booming right foot of his. And apparently him and Nick Dacos are getting on quite well sort of throughout the pre-season with, their 1-2s and finding each other. So, I mean, I think both are probably viable options. I think, probably safe sort of, top 10, top 15 defenders. But if you're going to ask me to pit these two up, I think I would be leaning slightly towards Sinclair, just purely because I know what I'm going to get from Sinclair just about every week. Whereas with Houston, I don't know if his role is going to sort of change around or whatnot from week to week. So I think Sinclair, just for reliability, is going to be my sort of pick with this one.
Yeah. And just to update listeners that are on YouTube, that's just a mistake on Houston's percentage. And I've just realised now he's not 56% owned as what I've written there. He's about 12% owned. So
he's 12, yeah.
What he's suggesting. But yeah, I do agree with Nathan. I think that just the security of knowing where Sinclair will play is probably earing me towards that. The hamstring issue's not ideal. I mean, obviously, it doesn't set him back too much. It wasn't sinister or significant in a sense. He's going to miss chunks of footy. I think the one doubt, if you want to play devil's advocate for Sinclair, is Mateus Phillip, who is out for a while with a stress fracture. So he was pretty much touted to play full-time mid this season alongside McRae and Steele, and that opens up the door for a third midfielder to rotate through, and whether that means that Sinclair plays more of a predominantly midfielder position is yet to be seen, but I think that creates risks in his scoring potential. I think from, watching games live, it seems like he struggles more as a pure midfielder scoring wise than a halfbacker, sorry. So yeah, it's yet to be seen what will happen. I guess they play Saturday against Port Adelaide in their first preseason game. I don't know if he'll play that game, but you will see in the preseason games exactly where he'll line up, and we'll probably have a good indication by the end of preseason exactly whether he's going to have a skew into the midfield or defence. And I think if he does start in the defensive half and play that role and does kickouts and everything, I think that's the way to go. But they've also got Wanganeen Miller as well. So, you're paying top dollar for probably these two in particular, and there's probably other names there that you'd want to go for potentially that could save you some money and probably score similarly, just because there are risks with these two in positional wise, injury wise as well. I think Houston's also suspended for the first round, if I'm not mistaken. So I guess
just opening round.
So you'll get a free hit essentially to see how he'll go. I guess it's not going to impact round one at all, but I guess you'll see. Not a free hit. Sorry, you'll probably want to see him in round zero. My apologies, but yeah.
Oh, not playing round zero.
Yeah, you want to see him play round zero. I guess that's the risk in the fact that if you see him play round zero, you probably have a better understanding of where he is. So maybe one to watch for the first couple of rounds. If he gets back to back hundreds, maybe jump on, is my kind of gut feeling with Houston. I think there is risk just starting him fresh round one unless you're fully confident he's going to play that halfback role and take kickouts. But yeah, there's probably others there that we'll touch on in a minute that are going to be maybe a bit better bang for your buck, and you can utilize that money elsewhere. And speaking of the cheaper options, we're just going to move on to these two before we kind of rattle off some other options before going to the cheaper end of the spectrum. But yeah, Nasiah Wanganeen Miller and James Sicily are two that come to mind straight away, priced a step down the 500Ks, the mid 500Ks, which, saves you about 30, 40 compared to the other two that we mentioned. Nasiah Wanganeen Miller at 543K, and James Sicily, I was surprised actually how cheap this bloke was, considering it was at the 600K mark last year to start the season, I'm pretty sure. But what are your thoughts on these two? Obviously, there's a reason why they probably ended up, priced at where they were with how they went in patches last season for different reasons. But what are your thoughts on these two? And are they viable options to start in your side at, say, a D2, D3 and kind of save money?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually got the guy in the middle of these two on the prices, as my D2 at the minute. So I definitely think it is a viable option. I guess for me, out of these two, I feel like Sicily is going to be the one that's really beneficial out of with Hawthorn. Purely because of the fact that I think last year he sort of played a lot of key key defender minutes, whereas this year, because there's Battle and Barris both at Hawthorn now, I feel like he's probably going to be really freed up to try and play that intercepting role, which he knows sort of best. So if you can get Sicily for under, 540k, I feel like that's probably a good buy. Because you just got to go back, 2023. He averaged 114 for the year, and he basically maintained his price the whole year, above 600k. So I feel like if you're gonna go down the Nasaya path, he sort of has incrementally gone up Nasaya, but he sort of hasn't hit that, that sort of 115, 120 average that Sicily has got, but he is tracking that way. So I feel like, I feel like both are viable options, but I feel like just purely because of what I know I'm getting, I'm probably going to lean towards Sicily. Even though he is hot-headed, he probably will get suspended, once or twice throughout the year. But yeah, I feel like just purely based on, I know what Sicily's capable of. He probably had a bit of a down year last year, whereas Nasai is still on the build up. So sometimes these younger bodies, they can sort of have a bit of a down year, especially after they sort of break out, which was probably him last year with that 100 average. So I'm not saying he's going to go backwards. He's got all the goods of a good sort of halfback flanker. But yeah, I think just for these two, I think Sicily's the way that I would be inclined to go.
Yeah. No, I do agree with it. St Kilda bias aside, of course. But yeah, I think Sicily is probably... I didn't watch the Geelong Hawks game, unfortunately, that first preseason game. So I didn't exactly see how that kind of worked with Barras and Battle in the side as well. But I can only assume that Sicily's going to get freed up more often than not with those two in the side. Like, even if they play Sam Frost as well, there's a lot of key defenders now with Barras and Battle playing more of a lockdown role and allowing Sicily to intercept. That's what he's best known for, and that's why Hawthorn have won a lot of games, is when he's able to intercept and basically rebound so effectively. I know that there's some risk of him playing forward or swings forward late in games to kind of salvage that, and there's conversations to be had whether or not he does play a forward role more often with the likes of Battle and Barras playing in defence. So does that mean that opens up a slot for a forward position for Sicily more often? Who knows? But I think he's probably, if you bet your bottom dollar, he's probably more likely to score those higher 100 scores than a low 60, 50 score with Barras and Battle both in the side, just because you've got your key defensive stocks locked down. So I think he's priced quite enticingly at 532. Like, people paying 600 for him in years gone by, and paying, as close to a floor of 500 is really enticing for owners, I think. And Nazai, I think, is a big watch as well, because, every year we tout, or St Kilda supporters think we need to, let this guy loose and really explode to the elite level. And he does that in patches. And I think from a SuperCoach perspective, that the only downside I say is, he needs a lot of disposals to score effectively, like a lot of short chip kicks, a lot of handballs around the back. He's not a very contested player. He's a loose ball guy. We need to get the ball in his hands more often, similar to Sinclair, to kind of utilize that elite kicking inside 50 as well. So, I guess it's a watch in the fact that If Sinclair plays more midfield minutes to cover Philippou early in the season, then Nazai's got that whole back line to himself, and I think he'll just roam around freely and probably get those hundreds quite cheaply. But I'd say that you're probably risking a lot if you want Nazai and Sinclair in your side both to start the season. I don't think that's probably a viable option just because it's pretty rare that both go hundreds quite easily. And Naz is probably the one that's more prone to a low hundred or sub 100. But yeah, I think Sicily's, if we had to pick between these two, Sicily's probably the one for me as well, just because of his cheaper price and, that enticing kind of intercept marking, rebound 50s kind of ability that he may have with Battle and Barras on the side. So that's ones for me. But before we move on to kind of your mid-price or dicer options, I'm just going to read out a couple of names, Nathan, that we obviously haven't touched on, and just kind of a quick rapid fire on anyone that you think is worth considering. If you want other options for your D1 to 3, really, just rattling off some names here. The guys that are the next most expensive, you got Luke Ryan, Lockie Whitfield, Dane Zorko, Jeremy McGovern. Then moving towards the lower 500s, you've got Nick Martin, Jordan Clark, Jordan Ridley, Nick Newman, Max Holmes, Bailey Dale, and probably Tom Stewart as another option. What are your thoughts on those names? Is there anyone that stands out to you in particular that you think could be an option here? I know there's one name in mind that you're probably thinking of, but what are your thoughts on those kind of other defenders in the picture?
Yeah, well, I've actually got a couple of names who I think can be viable options. So Lockie Whitfield, I think, is definitely a viable option. I think he really found his home last year. The only problem again with Whitfield, a bit like Nasai, is he does need a lot of disposals to rack up the scores. But when he gets them, he's just about the best kick in the Giants side. And they like the ball in his hands. So they do look out for him. Jeremy, I can't speak. Jeremy McGovern is an interesting one. I think he's probably more a draft player now as opposed to a classic player. Just because I feel like he does get burnt a lot with injuries, but when he plays, he can really score quite well. So I think he's probably more of a draft player. Nick Martin's an interesting one. I've heard that Essendon have actually been playing him a bit more forward, sort of that half forward role this year, which he was really damaging in last year for Essendon. So if that's the case, he might be one to keep your eye on. Nick Newman, unfortunately, is a no because he has done his ACL, so he won't be played. But the one that I'm really tempted with, and I am not surprised, is Max Holmes at 533,000. He's owned by a quarter of the SuperCoach community, so 25%. I just think that he's ready to take Patrick Dangerfield's reign as Geelong's best midfielder. And the fact that you can pick him up in the back line, I just think that it's his time to make that midfield his own. We saw what happened last year in the preliminary final once he went off, that Geelong basically just lost all of their ability to sort of run and gun, which is what got them to that stage. So I feel like that if you're going to go for a cheaper option, I feel like out of all of these, Sicily, Holmes, the Bailey Dale, Tom Stewart, I think Max Holmes is definitely the best option out of those ones. In saying that, though, the other ones sort of don't look appealing. Bailey Dale, I don't know how the Dogs are going to go this year. Nick Blakey, I feel like sides are going to put a bit more work into Blakey. And Tom Stewart, I don't know what Tom Stewart's role is this year, so I couldn't pick him with any confidence. The other one who I have got a little tiny bit of an interest in is Andy McGrath. And I think it's his time to shine. I think for too long, Essendon have been a nice club. And I feel like for Essendon supporters, I think McGrath is a player who perhaps has been a bit of a, whipping boy for them. But I think it's his time to shine now. I think he's been on the list now for, this is going to be his, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is going to be his 10th season. I think it's long overdue for Essendon supporters that as a pick number 1, like he was, that, it's his time to shine and really make that backline or even the midfield sort of his own alongside Merritt. So, but yeah, I feel like we've probably kicked off a lot of the guys. Zorko, I don't know about Zorko. I think he's the only other one. I know Jordan Clark. I feel like you can probably pick him. Ridley, you can probably pick. So yeah, I feel like most of the guys sort of above that 500k mark, you probably can pick with some confidence. But in my case, I've only got two of them, which are Sheasel and Max Holmes. I feel like if you're picking any more than two, you probably perhaps got to give up somewhere else to get, some, a third body up there. And I feel like once we get into the rookies, I feel like there are a few sort of good, cheaper options this year who can sort of, get maybe not a top 6, but, a top sort of 10 to 15. Which, if it gets to the point where you've got to move them on later, well, so be it. But yeah, I feel like if you're starting with sort of at least two of them, you're probably doing all right. If you're having a third one, you're probably going to have to give up somewhere else to make it work. So I feel like two is probably a good number. And if you can do a third one, go forward. But yeah, as I said, you're probably going to have to give up somewhere else to make it work. I think just with the way that the other positions are sort of looking this year.
Yeah, I guess as you said before we move on to the next rung down of players, there's a lot to choose from, but you got to be smart with what you're picking and probably play it safe in a sense. Obviously, defenders, they're more with the kickouts and whatnot. They're probably a better chance to score your hundreds on a more consistent basis, but there's a lot out there and you want to be picking smart because you don't want to obviously waste trades with trying to constantly chop and change based off, flipping premiums week in, week out. It's not like, what do you call it, AFL fantasy, where you're able to have those two trades up your sleeve each week. So you have to be a bit more conservative. But yeah, definitely some food for thought as we move into the preseason matches. But moving down a rung to kind of your 400k options, which are you're probably the most diciest in the fact that they're capable of scoring 100 pluses on a weekly basis, but probably don't have the runs on the board to do so. And they're kind of hard in the fact that if you do get them in, they're very hard to get out and upgrade accordingly, especially if they go downhill, because then you're trying to be forced another 100k elsewhere to try and upgrade to a 500k plus player. Having said that, on the flip side, if they do start like a house on fire, they can go up very, very quickly and make it a lot easier if you do need to side swap or keep them for the whole season. Two that come to mind straight away for different reasons is Jaden Short and Colby McKercher. One price just under 500 and one kind of at your mid 400s. Jaden Short, I guess the two main questions for you for each player is he the main distributor now with Rioli? I guess Rioli's now gone to the Suns. The Tigers' defense is very, very young now. That Short probably really has to step up as that main leader down back and really control that back line if they want to get that ball out of their D50 with any sort of a surety. But McKercher, on the other hand, there is some doubt with, a role change on him. Maybe not a permanent role change, but now the fact that he's probably playing more of a wing half forward role. From what I've seen from match simulation with his footage is that they're kind of wanting the ball in his hands a bit higher up the ground so they can utilise his kicking skills and running carry through the midfield, pushing it into centre half forward and maybe letting someone like Caleb Daniel take all the kick-outs and the D50 kind of entries or exits, sorry. What are your thoughts on those two in particular and any of those two kind of knocking down the door on your side?
I did have my eye on Colby McKercher at the start because I feel like he's in Harry Sheasel's position. Only the only difference is that Sheasel's probably more established. But yeah, I mean, they really liked the ball in his hands last year, Colby McKercher. And I feel like Rooster, as his nickname is, if he can get onto one of those kicks, he can comfortably kick the ball 50, 60 meters. And we know the way that SuperCoach scoring works, that he can really rack up points with, minimal disposals if he's kicking the ball long and effective. Which then brings me back to Jaden Short. So last year, I've got Daniel Rioli's stats up here. So Richmond, I can't see Richmond winning many games, unfortunately, for the Richmond supporters out here. And Daniel Rioli started at 485,000 last year, which I think a lot of people jumped on because they thought the ball might be down at Richmond a little bit more. And, he had established himself as the main, sort of player down there. But by the end of the year, he only finished 30K above that at 516, and he only averaged 92. So I don't know if you can be confident in picking Jaden Short at that price when you've got, Sheasel averaging 118, you've got Whitfield averaging 111, you've got, Houston averaging 106. If you're going to make that work, you're realistically going to have to expect him to score, average 115, which I think the highest he's ever averaged is about, I don't know if he's had 100 season yet. No, so the highest he's ever averaged in a year is 98 by the looks of things on here. 98, which is about where he's priced anyway. So I just think that if you're going to give me one of these two, I'm definitely taking Colby McKercher. Because I think North Melbourne are going to be on the up this year. And I feel like that if he's getting the ball sort of anywhere centre forward, that he's kicking because it's so good for a young kid that, I feel like he can really rack up scoring this year. Whereas Jaden Short, I think, is an established sort of commodity. And you know what you're going to get from him. Which is, a pretty good 100 most weeks. But in terms of pushing up into, like a Sheasel or something like that, I don't think he's going to do that. So just for context, so Nasiah Wanganeen Malera, who we spoke about on the previous thing, he averaged 100.9 for the year, and he's 543K. And that was only the 13th highest ranked defender. So unless you think either one of these two guys are going to be probably top 10 at worst, I don't think it's worth mucking around with these two. But if you want to pick one of them, I think I would be more confident picking McKercher, just purely because I think North Melbourne are going to be an improved commodity this year, and I think Richmond are basically at the bottom. I feel like I'd rather pick the player whose side's on the up than pick the player whose side is basically bottom rung. So that's sort of my thoughts on those two.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you. I guess with Short, you can argue both ways. You can argue the fact the ball's going to be quite a lot down there. So he's going to get a lot of the ball just because of how much ball's probably going to be in the D50. But on the flip side, that ball's going to be under pressure a lot of the time. So probably the disposal efficiency going out of the D50 for Short is going to be a bit of a problematic issue, considering he's not known to be the best distributor when he's under pressure, and it seems like he needs a lot of disposal to get to a high 100. But he's one that I guess you can wait on. I just don't pick him with any confidence to start the season when you can probably downgrade him to a Mills or someone cheaper and use the extra 100K to then bolster another defensive premium like I have at the moment. So there is a lot of risk with Short just with, how probably poor Richmond are going to be with how young they're going to be. And I can see someone like Short suffering because of that, and the pressure kind of impacting his ability to use the ball is probably my kind of 2 cents worth. And I think, if he was in Richmond's premiership side, a different story. He probably plays a lot more confidently, and the pressure's a lot less, and what have you. But I guess in a poorer side, you're going to have that pressure built on pretty quickly. But Colby McKercher, I think, there's an argument that you can probably pick him as well as Sheasel, and you're probably going to get some decent scores, but I just wouldn't pick him until I see consistently for a couple of rounds he can score in that higher up position. What I found as an owner in particular is he did rack it up like crazy in the half back line. However, when he started pushing into a wing kind of role when I think he got injured for a little bit and then came back on as a wing role.
Yeah, he
Then
did.
pushed back into halfback, and that's when he started scoring well. But I definitely know as an owner last season when he did play that wing role or that kind of pushing into the half forward line into the midfield, he really kind of struggled and just couldn't get the ball anywhere near as much as he was in the D50. It seems from the match simulations it's a little bit different now with maybe North being on the up more and they're getting better ball users and getting the ball in his hands more often. But I'd want to see him play at least a couple rounds, maybe before price changes to pull that trigger on McKercher. I'd be much more confident with your 550k plus players than going McKercher straight off the bat. But I mean, if you're looking for a cheaper option, he's definitely one that I guess you could go and kind of expect decent scores. I just don't think you can expect a very consistent 100 week in, week out at this stage in the year for sure. But moving down to a rung down before we move on to kind of our final thoughts on those cheaper players. Callum Mills and Sam De Koning are two that spring to mind, very similarly priced. Mills is basically in everyone's side at the moment. Coming off injury, was pretty much, as we spoke about last year in kind of the final series, was pretty much close to playing anyway, but just wasn't selected. Sydney probably needed his leadership at that stage in the grand final. We all know how good he is as a two-way runner, both in defence and midfield. He's basically Mr. Fix-It in that role. And De Koning is really dependent on his rucking ability and whether he kind of maintains that number one ruck spot for the entire year. We know we saw his scoring last year when he does ruck full time. He scores pretty strongly, and that can really be a benefit for your backline at that price. But what are your thoughts on those two in particular? Have you got either of them in your side or anyone around that price tag?
Yeah, I've got Callum Mills. I think he is absolutely a lock. From what I've heard, he hasn't missed a trick all preseason. I feel like he's going to probably play in that midfield line now with, you know, the awesome threesome, as I call them, with Heaney and Warner and Gordon. So I guess the only question mark I've got on Mills is I've actually got now this is going to be a controversial call here and a bit of a thing if this does blow up, but I've actually got Sydney missing the 8 entirely this year. So based on that, I don't know how he's going to be scoring, you know, week in, week out. But I feel like at that price, it's almost a throw at the stumps, because he is a proven scorer. You know, it was only a few years ago. Well, I think he was, even just 2021, 2022. Like 2022, he averaged 116 and was the 4th highest ranked player for the whole season. Now, I'm not sure if I'd be expecting a return to that, but because he's a defender, I feel like you get a little bit more luxury with picking someone like Callum Mills, in that, you know, if it probably doesn't burn you as much doing it in the back line. If it was a midfielder only, I think I would be a little bit more hesitant to pick him, but I feel like in the back line, yes, he's probably absolutely worth it. And it's no surprise that outside of a $136,000 rookie in Bo Allen, that he is the most popular defender currently in SuperCoach. He's in more than 50% of sides. He's in 59% of sides, to be exact. So nearly 6 in 10 players have him. So I feel like if you don't start him, you're probably not complaining as well. But I think you're probably going to be complaining if you don't start him. And he does sort of, you know, look like he's going back up to that, you know, 100, 110 average that made him, you know, one of the best midfielders in the league. As for De Koning, look, he is a bit of a unique pick. He's only in 7% of sides at the minute. But I guess the problem I've got with De Koning is I don't know what his week-to-week role is going to be. I feel like Chris Scott is someone who doesn't mind moving the magnets around depending on the opposition. So, I mean, De Koning did show enough that he could be the number one ruckman at you know, in that Carlton game. I know he got powered up, but the potential is there, and obviously his brother's number one ruck at Carlton in Tom De Koning. So, you know, he probably does have good pedigree there. But then the next week he might have to go down and play as a full backman. And I just think that if you're picking someone with that, at that price point, you probably want a more defined role, especially for Classic, because obviously you've only got a limited amount of trades. That I feel like if you're banking on him playing as the ruckman every week, go for him because he's probably underpriced. But I just worry that one week he's going to be, told to go down to a full back role, and he's going to, really burn you that week. And if that's the difference between, you getting into a finals or, even you winning a final, and whatnot, I just feel like that's a massive risk. So I think out of these two, I would definitely be more comfortable picking Callum Mills, purely because I think his role is a lot more super coach friendly, and also he's even cheaper than DeConning, which I just realised now. So I think in my eyes, I think if you're going between the two, if you can get DeConning at 361, I feel like just save the 4K and go down to Mills. He's got the track record. His role is probably a lot more defined this year, from what I've heard. I think Dean Cox has basically been using him as the midfielder, as centre bounce midfielder, which is where he did his best work under Dong Longmire. So I feel like it's a no-brainer. Just pick Mills out of these two and just lock him away, and just hope that he can sort of get up to that 105, 110 average, and then I think that's a good pick for the year.
Yeah, no, I do agree. Look, I mean, Mills, it seems like from the AFL just released the pre-season squads for Sydney and the teams they're playing tomorrow. But yeah, doesn't seem like Mills is in the squad at this stage. Probably just more of a load management thing than an injury thing at the moment. But yeah, I guess Mills is one that, look, there is risk that he gets injured early days. I guess at that price, you probably have a little bit more luxury moving him around at a cheaper one rather than, him being like 450K and then you're in a bit of strife trying to move him on. But we all know what he's capable of. I guess you get a free kind of look at him opening round before, if you want to tinker with him in and out your side. But I think he's one that I would assume, as long as he's good to go round zero, you're probably risking more not having him in your side than if just playing it safe. And if he does stuff it up, then you can probably move him on. We all know what he's capable of, as Nathan said. He's one of the most competitive two-way runners in the league. Reminds me a lot of Jack Steele with his ability to move back into defence and play that kind of sweeper role in defence, and shows his capability to run all over the ground without much fatigue at all. Shows his endurance levels are elite and things like that. And he has a game that's centered around SuperCoach. He's a contested beast at the end of the day, which is really beneficial for his scoring, and we all know that. And I think if he can get to his best, he's one that's a very easy peak. Sam DeConning is interesting. I've just grabbed these stats off a bloke called Woodsy on Twitter, who's has a lot of these stats kind of based on AFL fantasy. But for the non-official practice game, so chuck him a follow on Twitter or X, if you want to kind of keep track of some statistics for some of these SuperCoach relevant players. But he's been saying that he was main ruck for the first half. In the third quarter, moved down back before being taken out of the game. So he's there in and around playing ruck, but as Nathan said, it's more the case if he's going to be that sole ruck for the entirety of 4 quarters. And if he doesn't do that, then there's your main problem. I think if he does play key back, and he's a premiership winning key backman for the Cats, so Chris Scott would have no qualms in pushing him down back quickly to kind of shore up some stocks, especially if there's injuries down there. But I mean, it's one of the things to be a sole ruckman, and it's another one to be kind of that swing man into defence and ruck. And I guess that's the biggest problem, is that kind of assurance in scoring. I'd be pretty brave to pick him even at that discounted price. There's guys in and around that price that you can probably be a bit more safer on. And I think there's just too much risk there. So, yeah, I think Mills is a way for me as well. Before we wrap it up for tonight's episode, the first one back for the year, of course, is there anyone else around that kind of 300 to 400K mark that kind of screams out to you, Nathan? A lot of people, and it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on Harry Perryman, priced at 417.5k. Seems to be playing a lot of centre bounce attendances. At the moment, the Pracky game seems to be basically their third midfielder. Is there anyone else around that price tag that you can think of? That you got Nick Haynes as well, who's could be interesting watch playing off a half back line for the Blues. What are your thoughts on that kind of price tag range of players?
Well, I think most of them are priced at that thing for a reason, and that is because their scoring sort of fluctuates or it's consistently no good. So Harry Perryman, I think, is an interesting one. I'm still just hesitant picking him because from what I've heard at Collingwood, he has played predominantly midfield. But because he was a bit of a Mr. Fixer at the Giants, I'm not sure if Craig McRae is going to be afraid to sort of throw him around a little bit just to help him try and find the spot if that midfield role doesn't work out. Because Collingwood have got, they've still got all of the names in there. They've got De Goey, they've got Nick Dacos, they've got Jack Crisp, they've got Pendlebury still going through there. They've got Sidebottom sort of and Dacos on the wing. So it is very competitive, that midfield sort of spot. I definitely think, based on his preseason, I definitely think he probably is going to be in Collingwood's starting side in round one opening round against the GWS Giants. Which, disclaimer, I did say before, we weren't playing round zero, but that is Dan Houston's match out. So in terms of that, there's probably not really a lot of other players around that sort of price that I'm really looking at. I'm just having a look here. There's no one who really screams off me. I think Isaac Quainer, I don't think he's going to be a top 20 defender, but I think he is underpriced at 315k. He was really down last year. And then we're basically moving down into the 200,000s, which I have had a quick look at the 200,000s. And I think the only one who I would probably pick with any confidence in there is Kadeen Coleman. Even that's a question mark because of his...
Yeah, I don't think he's playing for the first couple of rounds. He's at least
so
he's basically don't worry about until
and he's the only one who I would really sort of be picking in that sort of 200k price range. I think basically the only one who you're probably picking in the 300s is probably Callum Mills, with any confidence.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. As I said, I still think Isaac Quainer is underpriced, but I think if you're picking him, it's probably more for a quick 150k if he sort of starts off really well. But otherwise, I feel like it's probably Callum Mills or probably no one else in this group. Unfortunately, I think most of them are there for a reason because their scoring is really sort of fluctuating, or it's just consistently, around that sort of 60 to 70 mark, which unfortunately isn't going to cut it come August or whatnot for SuperCoach finals. And I think you're just better off avoiding them. So, I think for me, Perryman and Mills are probably the only two I would give any thoughts for under that sort of 450k price range. And Jaden Short. But otherwise, I don't think there's anyone else on here I would be any confidence in picking at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, the only other one I've just flicked through is probably Matt Roberts. Isn't one that is a standout.
And Roberts.
So if you look at his scoring, just going to bring it up here, pretty much from about round 18 was scoring predominantly as kind of that half back row when he locked himself into that role. So 95, 114, 161, 85, 92, 112, 118, 53. And that was pretty much when he hit that 53 was when the qualifying final was. So you pretty much take out those last three games because they're not SuperCoach relevant. But in home and away, so he just dominated off that half back line. It was a bit frustrating phoners last year when you had him as a rookie, I'm pretty sure, and then priced out and then missed out on another price rise and basically missed out on a keeper in that sense. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes. There's probably a few players that might impact his scoring, Mills being one of them if they do send him down back, or Justin McInerney's run through the half back line. You got Blakey. But I think if Roberts can show or replicate it, especially in the preseason games, he'd be a pretty good smoky, and I probably should have put him on there, but I'd almost pick him ahead of a Jaden Short and a cheaper version for McKercher just because of how consistent he was in that home and away season. And yeah, as Nathan said, Quaynor obviously was no good last year, but I would probably just avoid completely. Just more the case that, I understand that he could make some quick cash if he does score quite nicely, but there's a lot of mouths to feed in that Collingwood backline, and he's more of your one-on-one lockdown defender and has been one of the best for you guys at the moment in that one-on-one small defender category. So I think he's more of a AFL good player than a super coach player.
Yeah, I would go along with that.
If you want to go really unique, you can, but I'd probably.
I mean, as I said, 2023, which is his best year, averaged 74. So as I said, he's not in there to be a keeper. But last year only averaged 58. So he's probably, realistically, I'm just having a look now. He's actually only 60k cheaper than last year. So maybe I might scratch what I said before. Can we just cut out that bit about Isaac Quaynor? Because I think realistically, you're probably only going to end up making 100k at most. So it's probably not worth it for the couple of trades you're going to have to do.
Yeah, and that's what we kind of hone in on in SuperCoach, especially is there are speculative picks everywhere that are there to be picked as kind of an enticement pick, and 9 times out of 10 or even 8 times out of 10 they kind of blow tits up in your face just because they're priced there for a reason. They haven't done it consistently on a consistent enough basis, and you end up burning about 3 to 4 trades trying to basically merry-go your way around to a premium, and that's kind of the most frustrating part. If you can nail those premium picks early, you don't have to worry about flicking through to get your best players on field. But yeah, as we said, that's what we're here for, to try and give you a bit of advice, especially for the premiums and mid prices. That's kind of what we're looking at the moment. As we said, with rookies, we'll kind of give probably a deeper synopsis as the preseason games come to a close, and that'll probably be one of our last episodes going into round 1. But hopefully you enjoyed our first episode back for the new year. I know it's a little bit rough around the edges. We're still kind of waking up from New Year, getting back into the SuperCoach swing of things. But next episode, we'll take a look into the midfielders, and there's obviously a lot of midfielders to go around in that sense, and a lot of good names to discuss. But until then, we'll catch you for the next one.